So thank you everyone for joining the webinar. Like I said, I should be done by 12:45. There's some major construction going on behind me, so if you hear some loud noises, I apologize. What I wanted to do today, again, so a few little rules. So what I'll do is I'll ask you to chat the questions if you have any questions. When I ask you questions, and I'll read them out loud. I'll just mention your first name, not your last names, and yeah, so participate. Obviously, it'll be me talking a lot. I can't make it as interactive. I'm testing this less interactive platform, which I don't do as much usually, but I might ask you a few questions here and there. And what I want to treat today, and I'll just start now, is how to ask great sales questions. There are really 4 cornerstones to asking great sales questions. And the first, and I'll mention them to you now, it's state of mind. That's the first. So what is your state of mind? What is your client's state of mind as well? Active listening, your style and delivery, and then really what we call the questioning strategy per se. So what does that involve? What are the mechanics of the questioning strategy and how should we approach it? So it's a bit of a trick question because there's no perfect way of asking an amazing sales question. But with these 4 cornerstones, if you keep these things in mind and you respect the rules, the basic rules of these 4 cornerstones, I believe you can ask great sales questions. So let's start. Like I said, if you have any comments or questions, shoot in the chat. I have it open on the side, so I'll try to respond as quickly as possible. So the first thing is state of mind. So the first cornerstone. So the first thing you need to ask yourself as a seller, a salesperson, someone who is who wants to ask a great sales question is, what is your personal motivation as the person doing the asking? So what is your motivation? What can it be? So is your motivation to sell your product or service? Is your motivation to achieve your sales objectives? Is your motivation to achieve your company's growth objectives? And then let me ask, how important are these aspects to your client or to your prospect or the person you're speaking to? Is it fair to say that it's completely unimportant? If you're trying to sell me something and you come to me, and we're talking B2B here, we're not talking B2C. So when you're in a B2B environment and you're trying to sell me something, usually it's to help me with something or whatnot. But if I feel that all you're doing is just wanting to sell your product, I'm not going to be very engaged. I'm like, well, I don't care about that. What it is what your product can do for me, right? So your first motivation, you need to ask yourself, how does it feel being sold on something you didn't ask for? And now I'll ask you to use the chat. How does it feel when you feel you've got a salesperson who's trying to sell something to you that you don't really want? So anybody, just put it in the chat. I beg you to put something in the chat. Not great, annoying. So Fab says not great, annoying. Paul says, I don't listen. It feels like you're being used. True, very good one. I just don't care really. I'm not interested and have no time. Correct. If you feel like someone's trying to sell you something and some of these are here, it might feel uncomfortable as well. You know, the person's being pushy, the person's it feels awkward, it feels bothersome, it feels annoying, and it feels impolite. Now, Eric says, I turn off. So is it possible that as a seller who has felt all these bad emotions when someone's trying to sell to them, then when you pick up the phone, so I know a few out there are actually doing prospecting calls, a few of you are at the executive level, but think of when you need to pick up the call to someone who you are trying to create interest with. You might feel a little bit like that. Oh my God, I'm going to bother them. Ugh, I'm going to make them pissed off. And they're not going to really want to interact with me. So what if your motivation, however, as a seller, is to help your client find a solution to a problem? What if your motivation is to help your client create an opportunity? What if your motivation is to help your client achieve their objective or their goal? Well, how important is that to your client or prospect? Well, obviously, it's a lot more important because all of a sudden now it's about them. So again, think of those times in the past where you've gone to buy something from a salesperson. It can be a car, it could be anything. It can be in a B2B situation, even a B2C situation, where you feel the person selling to you is engaged or motivated by helping you. Isn't that state of mind much more likely to have you be open to what's going on? I don't know about you, but I personally am. And I think that if you do that, and if you're sincere in that desire to help your client, that first cornerstone is accomplished. So that state of mind will get you ready to ask those good sales questions. It's putting you in the space of saying, okay, now I'm going to do something for the person in front of me rather than just trying to sell something or give them something. Right here, go to the next slide. So discussing something that matters to you makes you feel involved. Oh, for that to happen, you have to understand. Well, yes, you do have to. And we'll get to that, John, but not yet. Very good point. So discussing something that matters to you, well, all of a sudden, for the rep to discuss something that matters to you, meaning the client, well, then they feel involved, then they feel engaged, then you feel interested, then you feel attentive, then you feel excited, and then you feel inspired. Because talking about something that matters to you is exciting, but you need to get there, and you need to be in that state of mind. So state of mind, first thing, your motivation has to be about helping the person in front of you or helping them achieve something. If your motivation is selfish and only to sell something, it'll show, it'll come through, you'll start selling too fast, and you'll jump into it too quickly. And ultimately, and this is where I say it's a bit of a trick question, to ask a great sales question is not just about the question. It's about discovering what matters to your client through a question, right? And I think that's what you were saying, John, so it's a good point. Okay, let me keep going here. So what are you trying to discover? First level, what you're trying to discover, and we'll talk about the deeper levels later, is you're trying to discover an opportunity or a pain point. So when I say an opportunity, I don't mean an opportunity for you. Yes, there will be an opportunity for you later, but you're trying to discover the opportunity your client has maybe to grow. Maybe you can help them with that opportunity to grow, or you're going to help them solve that pain, right? Either of these are an opportunity for you, and that's great. We know that, but it's not about you right now. It's about them. So keep that in a state of mind. And all of you might be saying, yeah, of course, this is obvious. We know this and we feel it, but it's something you have to tune yourself into. It's something you have to say to yourself, if I'm not sincere about this, and I'm just worried about the end of the month, and I'm just worried about closing the business, if I'm just worried about these things, it's going to show through. You're going to get the feeling, your client's going to get the feeling that it's only really just about you. Yes, very good point, John. Common sense, but not common practice. I like this. Interaction. All right, I'm still getting interaction from this webinar. The second cornerstone is active listening. And active listening, again, there's a lot of logic here, but it's still a mode that you have to put yourself into. So the first part of active listening is to ask open-ended questions. Now, with some of you, we've done some training and some workshops. Some of you we haven't. So a lot of you know that it's a lot more difficult than we think to ask an open-ended question, because often we have something in our mind and we're saying, we want to find out this, and we often ask, do you, have you, are you, we're getting yes or no answers because we're saying, have you had this problem before? Do you wish to solve it? So we have a tendency to gravitate towards closed-ended questions. We'll talk about that a little later, but make your questions as open as possible. What does that do? It opens up the conversation and lets that client, prospect, or even, you should be doing this with your kids. You should do this with your wife. You should do this with your husband. When you have those open-ended questions there, it really enables the discussion to come forward, and you're putting the answers in your clients. It's their responsibility to give you the answers that are important to them. So that's what the open-ended questions start with. I hope you like my little drawings. Did them myself. I'm very proud of them. Second thing, and this is obvious, you've heard this, anyone who's in sales, you've heard the good old adage, you got 2 ears, 1 mouth, listen twice as often as you talk, and no one does it. Thank you, John. Yes, great use of Crayola. It wasn't Crayola, it was Sharpie. So you need to listen. You need to really, really listen. And it's harder done. It's harder done than said. We listen for things that we're looking for, but listen. And the next thing is reflect. Reflect on what's being said. So not only ask open-ended questions, listen, reflect, and summarize. If there's something you don't understand, summarize, clarify. Make sure that you really understand what's going on. I saw this great podcast by Simon Sinek a few days ago. He says, don't be worried to be the idiot in the room. What's the idiot in the room? It's the person who asks questions to clarify, to find out. Doesn't mean to act like an idiot, but don't be worried about asking the questions to clarify, to understand. It also shows engagement. Don't judge. Usually in a sales situation, we don't judge, but don't be too quick. In a sales situation, the judge means don't be too quick to offer a solution. Take the time to really understand, deep dive into what's going on, and go much beyond what you might think is important to them to really understand what's going on. Don't judge too quickly. Don't jump into starting to give a solution or an answer too quickly. And listen for emotions. Of course, with a client, it's not usually going to be sadness, but it could be anger, it could be frustration, it could be desperation, it could be just the way they're answering, that this is something that's really frustrating them. This is something they've been contending with for a long time. So listen for those emotions. Have the empathy to understand what's going on in this person's reality. Next one is show interest. How do you show interest? Well, when you've asked an open question and you're listening to all these things, go down that path. Don't follow a strict guideline of preset questions. Allow yourself to show interest in what the person's saying to you and what's important to them. And then the next one is ask probing questions. So if you've done all this, you've started with your open-ended questions, you listen, you reflect, you clarify, you summarize, and then you'll ask a probing question to understand how it affects their reality. So if they're telling you something specific about a problem that they're having within the business, let's say, and you sell an accounting software, but it affects operations and it affects the ERP, well, ask probing questions to understand the reality, to understand the universe in which they work in, to make sure that you completely comprehend what's going on. Again, your probing questions as much as possible should be open. So, active listening, ask open-ended questions, listen, reflect, summarize, listen for emotions, clarify, don't judge, show interest, and ask probing questions. So we've done state of mind, we've done active listening. Any comments or questions so far? Feel free to just jump in there. If not, I'm just going to move on to the next step. And I will look at it. So if I don't answer right away, I apologize. Again, first time I do this, so I'm trying to keep the chats going as well. All good. Okay, perfect. All right, so I'm going to keep going. Next thing is your style and delivery, particularly in an interaction. I mean, it's important in a presentation. I'm doing my best here. I hope my style and delivery are good. But what's important is there's 3 main aspects to your style and delivery. There's the tonality, so the tone of your voice. Obviously, your body language is very important too. But your pace, so how quickly and how slowly you speak. I know I have 45 minutes, so I've sort of calculated it, so I'm going into a certain range. And also silences. I'm not using silences in a webinar, but when you're in interaction, when you're speaking to someone, so your tone of voice, if it's someone who's, very excited and speaks quickly, it might be okay to adjust to their pace a little bit because they're quicker reacting. If there's someone who speaks more slowly, or someone who likes to, dwell in their own words, take your time, mirror to a certain extent. Don't mirror the extremes, but mirror to a certain extent what's going on. The use of silence, I want to give you a very specific example. I'll give you an example of a mistake that I have made and I still make sometimes. If you're asking an open-ended question, if you say, what exactly are the issues that come up when you're doing X or Y, right? And then you should just stop and have the silence. What I would tend to do sometimes is say, What exactly, what exact issues are coming up when you do X or Y? Is it this? Is it that? Is it here? Is it there? Is it there? So you're sticking in all of these parameters that might guide the answer. Allow for that silence. That silence, first of all, will allow your client or prospect to think about the answer, which is fine. And it'll also put them in a situation where they will want to respond openly to an open question rather than going down the path of where you may have guided them. Sometimes what we do when we see someone thinking over, we'll say, well, is it this? Is it that? Because we think they're having a hard time thinking about it and we're trying to get to a point. So remember that. Some people need to talk time to process what you've asked. True. Exactly. They need to process what's going on and they need to think about it. Absolutely. And we often know where we're going. So it's a very good point. The next thing I want to talk to you about is 73855. So Albert Mehrabian did a really interesting, some of you may know him. If you do, you can say yes or no. If you don't, it's all good. It's a very interesting, I guess it's a study he did, I believe in the 70s or the 80s. Now, the study was done with people who know each other on emotionally, so brothers, sisters, family members, whatnot. And the 73855 is when you're actually talking to someone, the engagement or what is retained from the content is 7% is the content, 38% is the body language and speech and tone and pace and all that, and 55% is the body language. Now, I want to put this into perspective, and I'll give you the kind of questions that were asked. So I'll use my wife who's on the webinar today. So if my wife Jo came home and said, Paul, I cut my hair into a mohawk and I dyed it green, and she asked me, what do you think of that? And I said, I love it. It looks amazing. It looks great. I'm so happy that you dyed your hair green. So everyone listening to this right now knows that I hated the green mohawk, right? And I said, oh my God, what did you do? Nothing against green mohawks, by the way. I'm just giving this as an example. So what happens there? So you're going to base the validity of that whole statement. 7% of it's going to be based on the content, the fact that I said I loved it. 38% my body language, my tone and my vocal language, if you like, when I was saying, yeah, I love it. And then I don't know if you noticed, but I was doing, yeah, I love it. So, and 55% is, the body shaking the head saying, no, I hate it. So keep this in context. Now, of course, in a B2B situation where you're presenting and you're in front of a large group, the content part's going to be way more important. It might even go up to 60 or 70%. But this all to say that body language and tonality do have an effect on what's going on and how people would respond to things. So a better question, sorry, I'm going to read some of the chats. A better question would have been, what motivated you to do that? Very true, John. You have to understand before you pass judgment. Very good point. And Paul says, so much of the challenge is presenting selling in the virtual world. True. Paul, this is very true. If you're presenting as I am in the virtual world, well, there's not much interaction other than the connection on the chat. And, but I think in a virtual world, when you're having interaction, if you're there and you're asking the right questions and you're present and you've got a good Wi-Fi connection, you can get that connection. The barrier is in your head because they hear you well, they see you well, everything is there. So we need to get over that because it's a reality we're going to face moving forward. Thank you. Great comments. Okay. So we've talked about state of mind. We've talked about active listening. We've talked about style and delivery. It's true. One last thing in style and delivery. Remember this for those of you who are like me who talk too much. If you're in interaction, okay, if you're in an interaction, if you're talking with something, give yourself the 4-sentence rules. So in a dialogue, keep it to 4 sentences. If you've gone more than 4 sentences, make yourself shut up. Step on your foot. Count them if you have to. Because if you just talk and talk and talk, you're going to lose your partner's interest. So in a dialogue, to keep conversation fluid, to keep the other party engaged. This is all part of a study that George Kohlreiser did, again, I believe in the 70s or the 80s. When do you break this rule? Well, when you're doing a presentation, so right now. So keep that in mind. But again, for you that have a tendency to talk too much, if you keep this in mind, it's a very good point. am trying to keep this in mind more and more. I'm not perfect at this, but it's definitely something that I'm reflecting on. So let's talk about questioning strategy. So now we're getting into how do you build a great questioning strategy. So when you're in a selling situation, when you're trying to sell something, and I was speaking to a colleague earlier who said, I'm tackling a huge thing here, and I'm not going to go deep into the 10 things. That'll be the subject of another webinar. But really what you're looking to tackle when you're in a discovery, when a questioning strategy, is you're looking to tackle 10 different things. You're looking at the first level to identify a challenge, a little deeper, the need and challenge. Ultimately, the most important thing, and this is why it's in big, bold red, the motivation to buy. And these three things, we'll talk about it later, but these three things we will attack upon, we will attack with, or find out with, I shouldn't say attack, with open-ended questions, right? So, and then you also want to quantify, we'll talk about this later too, you want to be able to quantify, find out the value, not so much the budget, but the value of what it is you're fixing or helping them with, right? You want to find that out. And that could be more directed questions. We'll get there as well. You want to know if they're committed to solving the challenge. That too, it's a specific question you need to ask. If they're willing to invest, again, is a specific question, unless it comes out naturally. These are things you need to find out. You want to find out the urgency, how much of a priority this stuff is to them. It might be a great priority for you to sell to them, but it might not be a priority for them to fix it. You might be low on the totem pole of what's important. You need to find this out. It's also part of the qualifying process. And you need to understand, particularly in a large enterprise sales situation, you need to understand the decision-making process. So how is a decision going to be made? You need to find out the timeline for that decision-making process. And in the process of all this, you're going to find out, you want to find out if there is competition. And if you ask all of the proper open-ended questions and you ask some of the directed questions, you should find all of these things out. What did it say? I also believe it's important, John saying, I also believe it's important to use a funnel technique to narrow down the root cause. Absolutely. But John, today is really about constructing that great sales question, because of course, in another webinar, we'll tackle the whole sales process in depth, how we get there, what's important, and how to follow that sales process. But really the sales process follows the 10 things that you need to discover. And on top of that, there's, when do you present, how do you deal with objections and all those things. I want to talk about the motivation to buy, because as I said to you before, the most important thing when you're dealing with your client or your prospect is the motivation to buy. If you find out the motivation to buy and you ask the right amount of open-ended questions, you go from being a straight supplier to a partner. You go from being someone who is just supplying something that they may need, they may like you very much, but to being a partner, someone who helps them and moves forward. So that's where you're truly consultative, because they see you as someone who's going to help them move forward. What is a motivation to buy? It can be something related to personal growth. Think of if you're trying to sell into a large company. Yes, you might be helping them with that software. Yes, you might be helping them with margins. Yes, you might be creating great opportunity, but maybe ultimately what you're doing is you're helping that VP operations get the promotion to the chief, how do you say, the COO, the chief operating officer. So that's the ultimate motivation. That's a personal growth motivation. It might be financial growth motivation. If you're dealing with the owner of a company who is who wants to grow financially, who wants to achieve 100 million, they're at 50 million, they want to reach 100 million. Again, you're going to help them with all those challenges, and you might be that small cog in the wheel that is part of the answer to get them from that 50 to the 100. Well, that's a financial growth motivation. It might be a business growth motivation, that they want to expand across the country. They want to expand across the world. They want to expand across North America. It could be a legacy. They could want to retire in a few years and leave the business to their children. So this is the ultimate motivation. When you've asked what, why, when, where, how, all the way to the end, to the point, well, what happens when this happens, that. And then you get to a point where what happens next? Well, nothing happens next. I retire and I go sit on the beach. You've gotten to the ultimate motivation. You've gotten to the motivation to buy. And again, I can't say it enough. When you get there, boom, you're the partner. Okay, all right. I thought there was a new chat, but there isn't. So, so far so good. Any questions, any comments, insults? Feel free to jump in. How am I doing for time? Yeah, I'm doing all right. Okay, good stuff. I drew this great little graph. I'm very proud of this one. So how and when do we use the open questions? So the open-ended questions, mostly, there's no absolute, but mostly the open-ended questions you're going to use in the beginning of your sales process. So to find out, excuse me, to find out the challenge, to find out how that challenge fits into the need and want, to find out the opportunity, how that opportunity fits into the need and want. So what do I mean by opportunity? If they want to, if the challenge is to grow something new, well, that's an opportunity. If the challenge is to fix a problem, well, that's a challenge. And what's the need or want? Well, to fix that, to enable them to fix the margins. And then you're following into that motivation to buy. So we want to grow across Canada. You know, once we're Canada-wide, I haven't thought of anything else, but I've achieved my goal. So this open-ended questioning strategy, depending on what you sell, depending on what product you sell, what service you sell, the level of relationship you have with this prospect or client, can take as little as 20, 30 minutes. It can take as long as 4 hours. And basically, as long as you have questions to figure out, to try to figure out what's going on, then you are still needing to ask open-ended questions until you get that motivation to buy. Now, you might not get there all the time, but if you ask those open-ended questions and you just keep going, the client answers you something and you keep going at other levels until you understand the whole business, then hopefully you'll achieve the motivation to buy. I just want to stop and read a comment here. Taylor's asking, Paul, if it's not for today, then no need to answer. But what if their emotion doesn't match up with what you're actually offering? Do you give up? It's a very interesting question, Taylor. And if their motivation, if their growth objective or their business objective is not helped by what you are selling, you have a problem because you won't be a priority. If their motivation and their growth, their ultimate number one most important thing is not going to be helped by what you are selling, it's probably not going to happen. But we can talk about that more deeply another point, but that's important. So you need to find out the path. So, you know, I'm talking to Taylor here. So if that video teaching platform doesn't help them achieve a need, a want, an opportunity, that doesn't help them achieve growth or help their margins, then there's a problem, there's a disconnect, and we need to understand that disconnect. Either they're not making the connection, or we're not making the connection, or there's not a connection. And if there's not a connection, well, then you're disqualifying. Great question, Taylor, thanks. So open questions really help us get to that motivation. So once we get there, and only once we get there, we can ask more directed questions to keep qualifying whether we're going to help these people. So Taylor, in your case, you're going to want to find out, and everybody in any case, you're going to want to quantify that problem or that opportunity. So let's make it really simple. You know, the problem you're helping with has a value of, you know, 1,000 man hours and is worth $1 million, right? So that's, you've quantified that problem. It's not so much the budget of what they're willing to invest. You've quantified the value of that problem. You might be not all of the elements that they need to calculate in there, but at least you're one of them. And it'll help you eventually to get to the next level. It's incumbent on us to understand that before we get into the type of conversation. You have to do your homework on the vertical to have in-depth comprehension. Yes, this is true. I agree. So I'm going to keep going. Sorry, I'm not used to this chat and thing, so I'm going to keep going. All right. So quantification, very, very important. After the quantification, you need to understand if they're committed to finding the solution, right? How important is it for them? So, hey, this might be $100 million opportunity, but they might have a burning problem that's costing them $1 billion a year. Well, then that might be the priority. So you might be on the back burner, right? So you need to know if they're committed to finding a solution. Are they willing to invest, right? So if your solution, if the problem is $100 million or the opportunity is $100 million and your solution is the equivalent of, let's say, $10 million, well, are they willing to invest that $10 million to bring them in the direction of solving that $100 million project, right? And if at any point you're getting no, then you're either going to disqualify or go back to the open questions and go back to the solution to find out what's going on. And I'll give you a little example at the end of this, okay? Remind me if I haven't done it. Raise your hand. You also want to find out the urgency. How quickly does this need to be solved? How high is it in the priority of things, right? And then you want to find out, again, like we were talking before, the decision-making process to get there, particularly in a large enterprise situation. If it's a smaller company, it might just be the owner, it might just be the VP, and it's a lot simpler, but you still need to know this. And the timeline for the decision. You need to know these things. Now, if you've noticed here somewhere, not once have I mentioned presenting yet. You don't present until you know that your client, ideally, now there's always an exception, but ideally you don't present your final presentation or your offer until you know that your client is committed to solving this situation. They're committed to investing, that you know all of these things. Once you know all of these things, then you can allow yourself to present, right? But before you present, there might be some objections. So if there's any objections, any friction going on here, you need to go back and ask more questions. You don't need to start going into sell mode. You're not going to go into sell mode. If there's an objection, you're going to say, tell me more about why you're concerned about this, or tell me more about why you're not willing to invest right away. You want to find out, because it might be very logical. And if it's very logical, you might say, okay, we'll hold off or we'll wait for 6 months. Or it might be something that you might want to challenge them eventually and say, well, you told me, and I'll give you the example now. I was talking to a client, this was about 1.5 years ago, who said to me, you know, we're losing about $100,000 a year, right? So they were, no, it was more than that. Sorry, it was $500,000 a year they were losing, and they were losing this, and it worked out. So if you do 500, that's $250,000 in 6 months. And he said to me, Paul, I'm not ready to do this right now. You know, don't want to work on it because I want to wait 6 months. And then I said to the person, I won't say his real name, I said, Jim, he told me you're losing about $500,000 a year. He said, yeah. I said, if you wait 6 months, what's going to happen? He says, I'm going to lose $250,000. I said, do you really want to wait to lose $250,000 to keep going? And that's where he said, you know, you're right. Let's start right away. And you know, we started working and it helped and it moved forward. Jim is a happy client now. So all that to say that, you know, you need to challenge. And this was before I even presented the final solution. I said, are you willing to invest to fix this, right? But I hadn't presented the solution. So I hadn't gone into presentation mode yet. I figured out the objections, whatnot. And I understand some of the businesses here, you might have to show things before a certain amount of things, but you're not doing your final offer until you've done all of these elements. In the process of all this, you should find out if there's competition. If you're really in that partner mode and you've really understood that motivation to buy, you're mostly going to find out if there's a competitor in there. And if you've developed that close relationship. And also if you've asked all these questions, you're mostly going to find out. And if you do discover there's a competitor and that they're nose and nose with you, and maybe their offer is better than yours, you need to find that out because you need to disqualify and move to another opportunity. Checking the time here. Okay, we're okay. So once we've done all this, then we present, then hopefully we close, and then we either pass or we either fail. And I say this because anywhere in the process here, there might be a true objection or there might be a true barrier for you to do business. And let's face it, anyone who is dealing with a lot of business, anyone who's dealing with a lot of potential clients, anyone who's got a large sales funnel, I shouldn't say anyone, most everyone is probably not, you know, at the first level of the funnel is most likely not closing over 50% of what's coming in the funnel. So if you've got, you know, 100 potential clients or prospects at the top of the funnel, most of the time you're not closing 50 of them. You might just be closing 10, which might be a great closing ratio in your business. You might be closing 15, 20, 30, 40. I rarely hear of 50 and over. Might happen, but it's pretty rare. So what we're saying here is you're probably going to fail more often than you pass in getting all of this stuff done, and that's okay. And the idea there is to have as much in your funnel as possible and to be as good at qualifying as possible and have the honest conversations to find those things out. So motivation, had that flash in again. So I want to tell you a little bit more in the questioning strategy too, how we learn. So 10% of what we read, we will retain, 20% of what we hear, 30% of what we see, and 50% of what we see and hear. Of course, if you're, depending on whether you're audio or visual, that can vary. And this is according to William Glasser, you know, these are rounded out numbers, but I think it gives you a good impression. If you're seeing and reading something, it will stick with you much more than if you're just seeing it or just reading it. And if you are saying it, it sticks with you a lot more than if you're experiencing it. So what does this mean is that how engaged as a client when we are talking. And unfortunately, I have to do this for the webinar, but for you guys right now, what does that mean? Is you're probably retaining, you know, if I'm really lucky, maybe 30% of what's going on. So if I do, or 50%, sorry. So if I do a quiz later on and I ask you a question, you might retain up to 50%. If you don't apply what you learned in the first week, you lose 70% of what you learned. Okay, interesting. I didn't know that, John. So I believe that. So again, if you're in a state where you're just listening or you're just or just absorbing it, and again, with what John's saying, you won't retain as much. You lose a lot of it. But on the spot, if I was to quiz you right afterwards, you know, if I'm lucky, you'll retain 30 to 50%. And if you put it into application, then you'll learn it. It'll stay with you longer. So, and then, so there you go, 20%. And then how engaged is a prospect when they are talking, right? When they are the ones who are, when you're making them talk. So when they're the ones speaking. So if they're, so they'll remember up to 70% if it's just a discussion. And if they're really engaged, 80%. So what will an open-ended question do? Well, hopefully it'll get you to the 80% because you're getting them engaged. You're getting them to talk about the opportunity. You're getting them to talk about what's important to them. It's coming out of their mind, out of their mouths, right? And if you're asking the right questions to find out how you can help them, they're going to tell you what needs to be fixed and where you need to go. I'm going to take a sip of water here before my throat falls apart. Any comments or questions before I move on? We have about 5 minutes left. Nope. Okay, all good. I'm going to keep going. So I want to show you something. This is all about asking open-ended questions, closed questions versus open questions. It's a little game I played with Fab, my podcast mate, to show you how these things work. So hopefully this works. Just tell me in the comments if you don't hear it, okay? If you do hear it, just give me a thumbs up or an okay. So here we go. There we go. Hey Fab, how's it going?
Good, you?
So Fab is my podcast mate. We have a... Hey Fab, how's it going?
Good, you?
So Fab is my podcast mate. We have a podcast together, and I've asked him to play this game with me. I think he's done it in the past, but he doesn't have a great memory, so he doesn't remember, so it's perfect. It's called the Sales 5 Questions game. I just made that up. The 5 Questions game. So Fab, what we're going to do, it's sort of like playing 20 questions. Remember when you're a kid, you'd be in the car with your parents, and I'd ask you, and you'd ask them questions they can only answer yes or no. So in this game, I can only answer you yes or no.
You can only answer me yes or no.
So you're going to be asking me the questions. I can only answer yes or no for the first part of the game, okay? So you're going to get 5 questions. Now I'm going to think of something, or I'm going to select something that I see in your screen, okay?
Okay.
We're going to have 5 closed-ended questions that you can ask me. And after that, you get ejected out of your seat.
Boom. Awesome. That's a fun part.
Okay. So start.
Is it white?
No.
Is it on me?
No. Good question.
Is it black?
Yes.
Is it the drum kit?
Nope.
Is it part of the poster in the back?
Nope.
That was 5.
Okay, so first part. How did it feel asking those questions?
It's hard because you don't know where you're headed.
So you had to structure everything, and you had to try to figure out what I might be thinking of, and you had to think of good questions. They were good questions, actually. They were very good questions. But you didn't get to the answer because you know, obviously I made it hard. I didn't want you to think that.
Obviously.
But what if I said to you, you can ask me any question, an open question, any question you want. You only have one question to figure out what it is I was thinking of. What question would that be?
What were you thinking of?
Exactly, right? Isn't it way easier to find out what I was thinking of by just asking, hey, Paul, what are you doing? But that question's kind of lame for you, right? Because you're like, well, there's no thought process behind it, but you will find out what I was thinking of, right?
Right.
So what does this demonstrate?
Open-ended questions are better than closed-ended questions.
In general, yes. But obviously there's certain places for closed-ended questions, but in general, if you want to find out more data, open questions are a lot better to get there.
Yeah.
Do you want to know what I was thinking of?
I do.
I was actually thinking of the cymbal on the drum set. So
that's why I think you want that.
The drum set, I couldn't answer yes, and I couldn't say maybe because it was yes or no. So I had to say no because I wasn't thinking of the whole drum set. I was just thinking of the cymbal. But if you think of this in a sales scenario, do you agree with me that you could also make those mistakes, right? I mean, sometimes you think you have a solution. The client, you're talking about something that's similar, but you're not asking the question to why it's an opportunity or a challenge for them. So Pat, thank you very much for this. I appreciate it. And I'm going to. So yeah, thank you very much, Fab. You did a great job. Fab's actually a LinkedIn marketing genius and is often the butt of my poor questions on our podcast. So thanks again, Fab. So what happens when we ask, any comments on that? So this 5 questions game, you know, the reason I play that, and I often do this with prospects, and I often do, not with prospects, or in my training, is to demonstrate how when we build, when we build these questions that we take so much time to construct in that structure, it's probably a lot easier just to have that open-ended question. This is called, John says, this is called the 5 whys. Okay, I like it. Thanks, John. Okay, so what happens when we ask a good closed-ended question? Well, we've understood the subject's reality. So if I want to know, does Sylvie like the color blue? I just ask her. There we go. Now I understand. She likes blue. We're proud if we ask a really complicated question. If I say, I'll use Sylvie as an example again. If I say, Sylvie, you seem like the kind of person who's really athletic and you like to do outdoor sports, and I bet you have you have 2 dogs, a cat, and you like to go skiing and mountain climbing, and then she says, yeah, I do. So you're all proud of yourself. Wow, I asked that great question, and it's awesome. But really, wouldn't it would have been probably a lot better just to say, well, tell me what your interests are, because there might be things in there that I didn't figure out, like she might like to cook, she might like to camp and all this. So there are other things that I'm not getting to. I'm getting ahead of myself here, by the way. So closed-ended questions, they make the question asker proud, but they might not get the information you're looking for. So what are the benefits of an open-ended question? You're going to get to the heart of the matter much quicker, because the person, what's important to that person standing in front of you will come out, because you're saying what, why, when, where, how, and they'll tell you because it's important to them, particularly if you're talking about something that's of interest, right? Don't make any assumptions. You don't have to make any assumptions. You can just go again with those questions, right? And we engage in a conversation. So the person is there. Remember how we learn? It sticks with them a lot more. So again, my beautiful little drawing here. So what's important? So who, what, when, where, why, how. It's a lot harder than you think. I challenge you all now, not right now, because there's only 2 minutes left. I apologize, but I challenge you all in the typical sales questions that you ask to take those questions and convert them into the who, what, when, why, where, how, the ones that are important, okay? And then what this will do is it'll get you, if you're actively listening, you'll get to the next level. You'll want to deepen that by probing, by going deeper. You'll say describe, explain, tell, give, and then you'll get to the detail. So really, how to construct a great sales question is to have your state of mind be in the right place, to have good active listening skills, right? To have good style and delivery, and to build a question based on something you want to find out that's important to the client. So it's really that simple. So open questions. One thing I want to say too is if you're doing open questions and you're actively listening and you're building on what the client or the prospect's telling you, then you will build trust. You'll feel open, and you'll develop. They will feel that you are an expert because you're asking those good questions that are important to them. And if you don't, if you have all these pre-planned, even if they're open questions, if you have a whole bunch of pre-planned questions, you're running an interrogation. And then the client might feel, well, okay, you've asked me this great open-ended question, you know, about my finances, and then boom, you've switched gears to my operations without any connection. Well, it might feel like an interrogation, like it would with a yes or no question. But it's very important to follow what's going through here. We say you can ask a close-ended question and then follow it up with how, what. Yes, you can. You can, but often we don't go there. So I prefer if you try to keep it open-ended question right from the start. But good point, John. So again, the advantage of open-ended question, it starts a conversation. It's easy to ask, right? The who, what, when, where, why, when are much easier to ask. It gets you where you need to go. What are the advantage, and also it really helps you identify the true important parts of the beginning of that relationship where you establish that partnership. So identifying the challenge, the need, the want, the motivation to buy, making you a partner versus just a supplier or just some annoying salesperson, right? So that's by really deepening that relationship. Now, it's not to say that you can't ask the odd closed-ended question in there, but if you're really keeping that state of mind and you're actively listening and you're asking mostly open-ended questions, you will most likely develop the relationship that'll create you to being a partner rather than a supplier, because you're not trying to sell anything. You're really, truly trying to identify the challenge, identify the need, and understand that motivation to buy from that decision maker or the decision-making group, right? So open-ended questions. So when is it okay to ask a closed-ended question? Well, when you want a specific answer, right? When you want it, and it's also if it's clear and easy, and also if you want to make another specific point. So the clear close-ended question, if you want to anchor something. So the client's just said to you, you know, we're having this huge issue with blah, blah, blah. You've talked about it for half an hour and you say, Mr. Client or Mrs. Client, if I understand correctly, you'd like to have this fixed by such and such a date, blah, blah, blah. And then they'll say yes or no. That's your anchor. Boom, it's coming down. You know, if you're in real estate, you know, when would, you know, you'd like to have your house sold by this date? Yes, boom. You'd like to have it on the market by this date? Boom. So you're going right into it. And that's when you want to focus on that close-ended question later on to anchor what's going on. Okay, more water, sorry. I'm almost done. Sorry, guys, I went over by 5 minutes. So, you know, when you're looking at quantification, commitment to solve, the willing to invest, urgency, these are decision-making process, timeline. These are all, I say close-ended questions, but these are all more directed questions because you need to find these things out. And if you don't find these things out, then you're in trouble. Thanks, Eric. Yeah, sorry, whoever has to go, of course. I'm recording this, by the way, so I can send you guys a recording. Thanks, Eric. And thank you again. So my last slide really is, I want to talk about this because what should you script? What should you structure? What should you have very specifically written down? Your opening statement, what Sylvie and I call your conversation starter, and your first two questions. That is about the only thing that should be scripted. And the rest should be built on open-ended questions with your state of mind being in the right place, your active listening skills being turned on, your style and delivery, and then your questioning strategy. And if you have all of these and you've established a proper process, you'll have great success. So guys, that's it. Thank you very much. Oh, yes, one last thing. A little trick. So if anyone says, I think, if you're asking yourselves, I think the client wants this, or I think he wants that, you haven't asked enough questions because it should always be, I know, right? Don't assume, find out, ask the question. Don't be afraid to look foolish, just ask the question. So again, thank you very, very much, everyone, whoever's stayed on. And any questions, any comments? I'm good till 1 o'clock if people want to stay on and ask more questions. Thank you, Taylor. Thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you, everyone. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. I'll just linger here. Oh, I do have one. What if a potential customer try and dodge open-ended questions? That's interesting. You might, if someone is dodging an open-ended question, if they're going off, so I don't know what that open question might be, but if they're totally dodging it, you have to ask yourself why. And you can even ask them why. I would ask them, can I ask you why, you're not comfortable in answering that question? And if they really don't want to answer a question, you need to find out why, because there might be something hidden behind it. So I would just ask them. I have no problem with asking someone. Thanks, Jess. Yeah, so I don't know, Taylor, if that answers your question or if that makes sense to you, but that's what I would do. Actually, I can actually have you guys. Okay, thanks. Oh, I'm going to go see. There's a. All right. Well, thanks again, guys. Any other questions? If not, I'll log off and I'll thank you. Thanks, Jess. Thanks, Taylor. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Paul's. There was two Pauls on there. And I'll wish you guys a great afternoon, a great weekend, and I will sign off. Ciao, everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.